You know, there's no breaches.
That a shooting victim was transported from the U.S. Capitol about 35 minutes ago.
She was a big supporter of the president. Her name was Ashli Babbitt. She was an Air Force veteran. We know that she was shot inside of the U.S. Capitol.
This was an unarmed citizen involved in a fatal police shooting in the Capitol building.
Real go-getter, and she wanted to go into the military at a young age. 14 decorations and medals for her service in the United States Air Force.
Without Ashli, that void, it might as well be a giant black hole.
The officer that was involved in taking your wife's life will not be charged.
We want to know what happened.
It started with the unjustified shooting of an Air Force veteran who stood at 5'2" and weighed a meager 115 pounds in a federal building open to the public. Her name was Ashli Elizabeth Babbitt. Her tragic death left many scars on those with good in their hearts, from the hole ripped through her family to the reporter, Taylor Hanson of Gateway Pundit, who held a fallen hero during her final moments. Within a day of this patriot's murder, the media on all fronts stopped reporting her name, and thus began an effort to sweep it under the rug amid lies and smears, propagating an insurrection narrative. Her family didn't lose hope. Like Ashli, a fire burned within those who loved her to ignite a movement with a single purpose: justice for Ashli. This is a fraction of the voices speaking up only a month after Ashli's murder. It started small, but the fire's been growing rapidly since. While the hate against her has been intense, the support has been stronger. The Department of Justice withheld all evidence within their control to make a false claim there wasn't enough proof to prosecute Ashli's killer, even withholding his name in a clear hypocrisy. To this day, over 14,000 hours of footage of the Capitol and the areas surrounding it haven't been released despite calls for it to be made public.
She did not present an immediate threat to him, and there was no legal justification for shooting her. We talked to many of the people on Ashli's side of the door. Nobody heard a warning. I don't believe she even knew the officer was on the other side of the room. He's off to her left in a kind of concealing himself in a room. So, egregious act of excessive force. Should have been charged.
That following Mother's Day, everyone felt Ashli's absence more than ever. Driven by that, Ashli's mother, Micki, and her best friend, Wilma, left on a tour for Sacramento to raise even more awareness, so she might finally get the answers and the justice her family deserves. Independent journalists and commentators began taking a stand.
If pointing and yelling at increasingly fascistic police who actively buried the fact that their fallen comrade passed of a fucking stroke 3 days after the fact just so Biden could boo-hoo over his butt-fucking casket and incriminate his political adversaries, yeah, what the fuck offense would this represent, comrade? Because it's directed squarely at fucking you female murdering fucking penile parasite.
She was the only person killed directly by violence at the Capitol 6 protests that we are aware of, and that violence came directly from the state. And the claim is pretty obvious, that the officer violated Ashli Babbitt's civil right to be alive. Ashli Babbitt, as far as I am aware, was not armed, did not appear to be engaging in any sort of deadly force that would justify a use of deadly force by the Capitol Police. So the question is, was that appropriate? Was it the appropriate use of force? Their investigation led to the Department of Justice announcing in April that it would not be pursuing charges against the officer in the shooting. And why would they, right? Why would they want to pursue charges against this officer? I mean, they're pursuing charges against all sorts of other officers, but not this one. Man, the news is quiet on this one.
The truth was breaking out despite the conspiracy and censorship. With word spreading further, the question has even reached right back where it all began: our government.
Mr. Rosen, do you recall the name of the young lady, a veteran wrapped in an American flag, that was killed in the U.S. Capitol?
I do. Her name was Ashli Babbitt.
Yes, Ashli Babbitt. Was Ashli Babbitt armed?
Again, Congressman, I mean to be respectful of your
Rosen,
observations, but I just don't want to talk about individual
Rosen,
situations or...
I'm reclaiming my time, Mr. Rosen. No, she wasn't. She was wrapped in a U.S. flag. Was the death of Ashli Babbitt a homicide?
Congressman, I'm not trying to be unhelpful here, but I just cannot comment.
I understand, but I mean, reclaiming my time, as the death certificate says, it was a homicide. Who executed Ashli Babbitt?
Congressman, I'm just going to have to say the same thing here, that I don't want to get into the specific facts and investigations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My question is this: if you care about the facts, the fact is she was shot inside the Capitol building by this person. These facts need to be asked, whether you have your own opinions on how this carried out or not. Ashli Babbitt lost her life that day inside there by this person. Why aren't there more questions that are asked, and will this be asked inside this committee? Do you expect that, Scott Walker?
What I found when I was governor, one of the most important things when there was officer-related shooting was to have an independent review. That was not only important for the victim, the family, the friends of that individual, but also for law enforcement, so that if the person involved in law enforcement is legitimate, there's an independent outside review of that. Conversely, if in rare instances there was a problem where they didn't follow the rules or the laws accordingly, there was an independent review. It wasn't left on that particular agency. One of the biggest problems with much of what happened on January 6th is that people don't fully know what happened and why.
Finally, after months of silence, the one person Ashli would have wanted to hear from most spoke up. Nancy Pelosi is spending a great deal of time, effort, and money on the formulation of a fake and highly partisan January 6th committee to ask what happened. Will Nancy investigate herself and those on Capitol Hill who didn't want additional protection, including more police and National Guard, therefore being unprepared despite the large crowd of people that everyone knew was coming? Will Nancy and her committee study the massive voter fraud that took place during the 2020 presidential election, particularly in swing states? That was the reason hundreds of thousands of people came pouring into Washington and, therefore, must be a big factor in the final committee report? Now would be a very good time to study the large-scale voter fraud in our presidential election. Will Nancy release the thousands of hours of tapes so we can see the extent to which Antifa and Black Lives Matter played a role, while also revealing who killed Ashli Babbitt? A real and thorough investigation of this must be done. And what about all of the violence, murders, riots, and fires that took place in Democrat-run cities throughout the United States by Antifa and Black Lives Matter? with virtually no consequence for this death and destruction. Will Nancy look into the vicious partisan investigations of conservatives and Republicans that are taking place by prosecutors all over the country? The 5-year investigation of me and all that so many have been through, including the fake Russia charge, and including the local Democrat-controlled New York prosecutors who work around the clock to get President Donald Trump, while murderers, drug dealers, and human traffickers go free.
By the way, who shot Ashli Babbitt? Who shot Ashli Babbitt? We all saw the hand. We saw the gun.
Who did shoot Ashli Babbitt? Why don't we know the name of that federal officer? U.S. Capitol Police is a federal agency. Why do we not know who shot her?
People are being treated unbelievably unfairly. When you look at people in prison and nothing happens to Antifa, and they burned down cities and killed people. There were no guns in the Capitol. They burned, except for the gun that shot Ashli Babbitt. And nobody knows who that man were. If that were the opposite way, that man would be all over. He would be the most well-known, and I believe, I can say man, because I believe I know exactly who it is, but he would be the most well-known person in this country, in the world. But the person that shot Ashli Babbitt, there was no reason for that. And why isn't that person being opened up, and why isn't that being studied? They've already written it off. They said, that case is closed. If that were the opposite, that case would be going on for years and years, and it would not be pretty.
Yet, even as the public needed accountability, Democrats ignored the people's will to put on a one-sided show full of lies to further their narrative and silence the truth. Once they'd spread enough lies, the elite finally allowed their murderous, shameful excuse of a bastard lieutenant to be identified. Michael Leroy Byrd, the infamously incompetent man who'd left his firearm unsecured in a visitor center restroom inside the Capitol. This was the man they judged exonerated in an internal investigation. Now we see why they refused to release the 14,000 hours of security footage of January 6th. However, this act alone destroyed their reason for keeping his identity hidden at all.
You wrote, finally, good for Trump for publicly condemning the plight of detained January 6 protesters and the hypocrisy, by the way, handling of J6 protesters in 2020 rioters, and the silence of McConnell et al. This is becoming a big issue for the base. GOP leaders ignore at their peril.
It's time to remind our government its tyranny will not endure. And accountability starts with us and goes upward, not the other way around. They represent us. They don't rule us. We, the people, demand to know. Where's the justice for Ashli Babbitt?